The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Silverbridge as Rosalie Bennett clutched her carpet bag tighter, painfully aware of the stares that followed her like persistent flies. The dress that had seemed so practical and sensible when she'd packed it in Boston now felt like a beacon announcing her foreignness to this frontier town. The year was 1878, and Rosalie had traveled over 2,000 miles to start a new life. But her first steps in Silverbridge were proving more difficult than she'd imagined. Rosalie lifted her chin despite the heat crawling up her neck. Her dress of vibrant purple with an unusual asymmetrical hemline that her late mother had designed was perfectly respectable, if unconventional. In Boston, it had drawn compliments. Here, it drew snickers. "Would you look at that get-up?" A woman's voice carried clearly across the street. "Looks like she got caught in a tornado and lost half her skirt." Laughter rippled through the small gathering outside the general store. Rosalie tightened her grip on her carpetbag until her knuckles whitened. She'd come too far to turn around now, even if she could. The stagecoach that had dropped her off was already disappearing in a cloud of dust, carrying with it any chance of retreat. "I hear they wear all sorts of peculiar things back east," another voice joined in. "But I ain't never seen nothing like that." Rosalie forced herself to keep walking, eyes fixed straight ahead. The boarding house was supposed to be at the end of the street, and she focused on reaching it before the tears threatening behind her eyes could fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. Just as she was passing the saloon, a tall figure emerged, pausing in the doorway to adjust his hat against the sunlight. Rosalie barely glanced at him, intent on moving past quickly, when his voice, low and resonant, cut through the murmurs and giggles. "It's the first thing I've smiled at all week." Rosalie froze, certain she was the target of yet another jest. She turned slowly, ready to face down one more detractor. But the tall cowboy wasn't looking at the others. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-weathered face, were fixed on her. And true to his words, a slight smile curved his lips, though it didn't quite reach those serious eyes. "Excuse me," Rosalie managed, uncertain whether to be offended or confused. The cowboy stepped fully into the sunlight, revealing broad shoulders and a stance that commanded attention without effort. The others fell silent, watching. "Your dress," he said, his voice carrying enough to be heard by the onlookers. "It's colorful. Reminds me of wildflowers after the spring rain. Been a mighty dull week around here until now." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the cowboy tipped his hat slightly and added, "Welcome to Silverbridge, madam," before turning to the group of gawkers. "Surely you folks have better things to do than stand around in this heat." His tone was light, but there was steel beneath it. The group began to disperse, throwing curious glances back at Rosalie and the cowboy. "Thank you," Rosalie said, uncertain what else to say. Up close, she could see that the smile didn't mask the weariness in his face. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of more than just squinting against the sun. "Flynn Holloway," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Town marshal. And you'd be the new schoolteacher, I reckon." "Rosalie Bennett," she confirmed, surprised. "How did you know?" "Small town," Flynn replied with a shrug. "Word travels. And we haven't had many new arrivals lately, especially ones coming to stay. The boarding house is just down the way. Mrs. Patterson's expecting you. She'll get you settled." "I appreciate the direction," Rosalie said formally, still wary despite his intervention. "And they—" "Welcome." Flynn studied her for a moment longer, then nodded again. "It gets easier," he said quietly. "This town. It takes time to warm up to newcomers. But it does warm up, eventually." Before Rosalie could respond, Flynn touched the brim of his hat again and continued on his way, his spurs making a gentle jingling sound with each step. Rosalie watched him go, then turned toward the boarding house, feeling the weight of curious eyes still following her. But somehow, they seemed less hostile now. The exchange had lasted less than a minute, but as Rosalie continued down the dusty street, she sensed something had shifted. The marshal's simple words had done more than defend her. They had staked a small claim for her right to be there, dressed as she was, newcomer though she might be. The boarding house appeared before her, a two-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a small, well-kept garden that seemed miraculous in the dry landscape. Rosalie took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and climbed the steps to begin her new life in Silverbridge. Mrs. Patterson was a widow in her 50s with keen eyes that missed nothing and a disposition that managed to be both stern and kind simultaneously. She showed Rosalie to a small but clean room on the second floor, with a window overlooking the main street. Bathrooms at the end of the hall, Mrs. Patterson explained. Breakfast at 6:30 sharp, dinner at 6 in the evening. Lunch you'll have to manage yourself. No men allowed upstairs, no liquor, no coming in after 9 without prior arrangement. Any questions? No, that's all very clear. Thank you, Rosalie replied, setting her carpetbag on the narrow bed. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. Good. Now, about that dress. Rosalie stiffened, preparing for another critique. It's different, Mrs. Patterson continued. But it suits you. Still, you might want something a bit more conventional for teaching. The school board is rather traditional. Her eyes softened slightly. Don't worry too much about today. People talk because there's little else to do in a town this size. They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough. With that practical comfort, Mrs. Patterson left Rosalie to unpack and settle in. As Rosalie began arranging her few possessions, she couldn't help but glance out the window at the town that would be her home. She spotted Flynn Holloway further down the street, speaking with an older man outside what appeared to be the town bank. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about his presence. Don't be ridiculous, Rosalie muttered to herself, turning away from the window. You're here to teach, not to moon over the first man who showed you basic courtesy. But later that night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the distant sounds of the saloon piano and the occasional laughter drifting up from the street, Rosalie found herself remembering the marshal's words. It's the first thing I've smiled at all week. She wondered what had made the rest of his week so grim, and why a purple dress with an unusual hem had broken through that grimness, however briefly. Sleep came slowly to Rosalie that night, and when it did, she dreamed of wildflowers after spring rain and blue eyes that carried too much weight. The school building sat at the edge of town, a simple one-room structure that had clearly seen better days. Rosalie arrived early on her first morning, a full hour before the children were due to arrive, wanting time to organize and prepare. The key she'd been given by the head of the school board, Mr. Jenkins, turned stiffly in the lock, and the door creaked open to reveal a dim, dusty interior. Rosalie sighed. There was much work to be done before this place would be suitable for learning. She set down her books and teaching materials and got to work, throwing open the windows to let in fresh air and light. She was sweeping vigorously, her sleeves rolled up and a kerchief tied over her hair, when a shadow fell across the doorway. Miss Bennett. Rosalie turned to find Flynn Holloway standing in the entrance, his tall frame nearly filling the doorway. Today he wasn't wearing his marshal's badge, and his clothing was more casual, a simple cotton shirt, worn jeans, and the ever-present hat. Marshal Holloway, she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. She'd worn one of her plainer dresses today, heeding Mrs. Patterson's advice, but her efforts at cleaning had left her far from presentable. Flynn, he corrected. I'm not on duty today. His eyes swept the room, taking in the dust clouds still hanging in the air and the pile of debris Rosalie had already swept into a corner. Looks like Jenkins didn't bother to have the place cleaned before you arrived. It needs some attention, Rosalie agreed diplomatically, though some attention was a severe understatement. But it will be fine once I've finished. Flynn frowned. This isn't your responsibility. Jenkins should have arranged for this. He stepped fully into the room, removing his hat. Let me help. The children won't be here for a while yet. That's very kind, but I insist, Flynn said, already rolling up his sleeves. Besides, I was coming to check on you anyway. First days can be rough in a new place. Rosalie was torn between gratitude for the assistance and discomfort at being alone with a man she barely knew. But there was something reassuringly straightforward about Flynn Holloway, and the windows were wide open to the public street. Besides, he was the town marshal. Thank you, she conceded. There's another broom in the corner. They worked in companionable silence for a while, with Flynn tackling the higher cobwebs that Rosalie couldn't reach and moving the heavier furniture while she continued sweeping and dusting. The room gradually transformed from neglected to merely worn but clean. May I ask why you weren't on duty yesterday? Rosalie ventured after some time had passed. When we met, you were wearing your badge. Flynn paused in his work. I switch off with my deputy, Frank Wilcox. He takes Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I take the rest. Small town like this doesn't need two lawmen on duty all the time. I see, Rosalie nodded. And, was it a difficult week? Before I arrived, I mean. She felt bold asking, but his comment about her dress being the first thing he'd smiled at had stayed with her. Flynn was quiet for so long that Rosalie thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, there was trouble out at the Miller place. Their youngest boy, Tommy, went missing 3 days before you arrived. We found him the day you came to town. The way he said it told Rosalie everything she needed to know. I'm so sorry, she said softly. He was only 8, Flynn continued, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of pain. Fell into an old well out on their property. By the time we found him. He shook his head. It's part of life out here, but it never gets easier. Especially the children. Rosalie's heart ached for the family she hadn't yet met, and for the man standing before her who clearly carried the weight of everyone's sorrows in this town. So yes, Flynn finished, meeting her eyes directly. Seeing someone new, something bright and different like your dress, it was the first good thing in a difficult week. The honesty in his statement left Rosalie momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the sound of children's voices floated through the open windows. Your students are arriving, Flynn said, picking up his hat. I should go? Good luck today, Miss Bennett. Thank you for your help, Rosalie managed. And, Flynn, I'm sorry about the boy. He nodded once, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he turned and left, passing the first of the children on the porch with a gentle greeting and a tousle of hair for the smallest. Rosalie took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and prepared to meet her new students. But as she welcomed them into the classroom, she couldn't help but think about the marshal and the burdens he carried, wondering if anyone in this town ever helped him carry them. The first day of school was a whirlwind of names, faces, and establishing routines. Rosalie had 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 16, a common arrangement in small frontier towns where one teacher had to manage children of all ages and abilities. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but satisfied. Most of the children had been respectful, if curious about their new teacher from Boston. As she was locking up the schoolhouse, a young woman approached, pushing a baby carriage. Miss Bennett, I'm Rebecca Miller. The woman was perhaps a few years younger than Rosalie, with tired eyes and a hesitant smile. I wanted to thank you for the letter you sent. Rosalie had written notes of introduction to all the parents, but she'd included a special condolence to the Millers after learning of their loss. Mrs. Miller, I'm so sorry for your loss. There are no words that can truly comfort at such a time. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. It was kind of you to acknowledge it. Some folks in town don't know what to say, so they say nothing at all. She glanced down at the baby sleeping in the carriage. This is Sarah, my youngest now. She's only 6 months. She's beautiful, Rosalie said sincerely. We have had 3 others. Mary and John are in your school. Mary's 9, John's 12. Rebecca swallowed hard. Tommy would have been in your class too. Rosalie reached out impulsively and squeezed the young mother's hand. I would have been honored to teach him. A tear slipped down Rebecca's cheek. Marshal Holloway was so kind through everything. He was the one who found Tommy, carried him out himself, stayed with us until the burial. This town is lucky to have him. He seems like a good man, Rosalie agreed quietly. The best, Rebecca said with conviction. Been through his own sorrows, too, though he doesn't speak of them. Lost his wife and daughter to fever 5 years back, before he came to Silverbridge. The information hit Rosalie like a physical blow. Flynn Holloway had a depth of understanding about the Millers' loss that went beyond professional compassion. He knew their pain intimately. I didn't know, Rosalie said softly. He doesn't talk about it, Rebecca repeated. But it's why he's so good with the families here, especially when there's trouble. He understands. She straightened, wiping her eyes. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for the note. It meant something, especially coming from someone new who didn't have to care. As Rebecca Miller walked away, pushing her baby carriage with one hand and wiping tears with the other, Rosalie stood motionless, processing what she'd learned. The marshal's haunted eyes made more sense now. He had known the deepest kind of loss, and yet he had still found a smile for a stranger in a purple dress. The remainder of Rosalie's first week in Silverbridge passed in a blur of teaching, planning lessons, and gradually becoming acquainted with the townspeople. To her surprise, her initial reception began to soften. Mrs. Patterson introduced her to other boarders and to friends who visited the house. Parents of her students stopped her on the street to inquire about their children's progress. The owner of the general store, Mr. Wallace, was particularly friendly, offering her credit until her first month's salary arrived. Flynn Holloway remained a distant figure during this time. Rosalie caught glimpses of him patrolling the streets or riding out of town, presumably on official business. Once, their eyes met across the street, and he touched his hat brim in greeting, but he made no effort to speak with her again. Rosalie told herself this was perfectly fine. She had not come to Silverbridge looking for male attention, particularly not from a man with as complicated a past as Flynn Holloway's. She had her own reasons for leaving Boston, her own complications to overcome. Still, when Saturday arrived and Mrs. Patterson mentioned that there would be a small social gathering that evening at the church, nothing fancy, just folks bringing food and maybe some music afterward, Rosalie found herself spending extra time on her appearance. She chose another of her mother's designs, this one a deep blue with subtle embroidery at the collar and cuffs. The cut was more conventional than her purple arrival dress, but the color and detailing still marked it as something special. She pinned her hair more carefully than usual and even dabbed a tiny bit of her precious rose water behind her ears. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Patterson said approvingly when Rosalie came downstairs. "The blue suits you. Brings out your eyes." "Thank you," Rosalie replied, pleased by the compliment. "I hope it's appropriate for tonight's gathering." "Perfect," Mrs. Patterson assured her. "Not too fancy, but special enough to show respect for the occasion." They walked together to the church, a simple white building with a modest steeple that stood near the center of town. Already, people were arriving, carrying covered dishes and greeting each other warmly. Rosalie had contributed a plate of cookies made from one of her mother's recipes, using the boarding house kitchen with Mrs. Patterson's permission. Inside, the church pews had been pushed back against the walls to create an open space, with tables set up for the food. Children darted between adults, their excitement palpable. Several of Rosalie's students waved or called greetings, which she returned with a smile. "Miss Bennett, you came." Mary Miller appeared at her side, looking more animated than Rosalie had seen her all week. "Of course I did," Rosalie replied, smiling at the girl. "Is your family here too?" Mary nodded. "Ma and Pa are over by the punch bowl with baby Sarah. John's outside with his friends." She tugged at Rosalie's hand. "Come meet my aunt and uncle. They live on the ranch next to ours." Allowing herself to be led across the room, Rosalie was introduced to a steady stream of people, most of whom welcomed her warmly. The initial wariness she'd encountered seemed to have dissolved, replaced by genuine curiosity about the new schoolteacher. She was in the middle of a conversation with the town doctor and his wife when the door opened and Flynn Holloway entered. He wore a clean dark shirt and jeans, his marshal's badge absent, his hat in his hands. His hair, free from the hat, was thick and dark with just a touch of silver at the temples. The room didn't fall silent. This wasn't that kind of dramatic entrance, but Rosalie noticed several people glancing his way with warm greetings or nods of acknowledgement. Flynn returned these greetings politely but didn't linger with anyone, making his way steadily through the crowd toward the food tables. "Marshal Holloway doesn't often attend these gatherings," the doctor's wife, Mrs. Green, remarked, following Rosalie's gaze. "He's a private man, keeps to himself mostly. Except when he's needed," Dr. Green added. "Then there's no one more reliable." Rosalie nodded, trying not to appear too interested. "I've gathered he's well respected here." Silverbridge was a much rougher place before Flynn arrived, Mrs. Green said. "He's brought a steadiness to the town that was sorely needed." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Rosalie found her attention continually drawn back to Flynn. He stood slightly apart from the main groups, a plate of food in his hand, speaking occasionally to those who approached him, but initiating few conversations himself. Later, after everyone had eaten their fill, several townspeople produced instruments of fiddle, a guitar, a small accordion, and began to play. Tables were pushed further back, and couples started to dance, a mix of formal steps and more casual movements. Rosalie watched from the sidelines, enjoying the music and the sight of her students and their parents enjoying themselves. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Flynn's approach until he was standing beside her. "Evening, Miss Bennett," he said, his voice low. "Marshal Holloway," she returned with a nod. "It's a lovely gathering." "Flynn," he corrected again. "And yes, these socials are one of Silverbridge's better traditions." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the dancers. Then, to Rosalie's surprise, Flynn turned slightly toward her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Bennett?" The invitation was delivered so formally, with such careful control, that Rosalie almost declined out of sheer surprise. But something in his expression of vulnerability beneath the composed exterior made her nod instead. "I would, thank you. And please, call me Rosalie." Flynn's hand was warm and calloused as it enveloped hers, leading her to the improvised dance floor. The musicians had just begun a waltz, slower and more intimate than the lively reels they'd been playing. Flynn placed his hand properly at her waist, maintaining a respectable distance between them as they began to move to the music. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a tall, solid man. "You dance well," Rosalie commented, trying to ease the tension that had suddenly sprung up between them. "My wife insisted I learn," Flynn replied, then immediately looked as if he regretted the words. Rosalie's step faltered slightly at the mention of his deceased wife, but she recovered quickly. She had good taste. A faint smile touched Flynn's lips. Yes, she did. Catherine was particular about certain things. It was the first time Rosalie had heard his wife's name, and the way Flynn said it with a mixture of tenderness and pain made her heart ache for him. "I heard about your loss," Rosalie said softly. "Mrs. Miller mentioned it." "I'm very sorry." Flynn's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her waist. "It was a long time ago. Some griefs don't fade with time," Rosalie said, thinking of her own losses. Flynn's eyes, so blue and direct, studied her face. "You speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but Rosalie answered anyway. "My parents. Father 3 years ago, mother just last winter. There was no one else. That's why I came west. To start fresh." "I understand that impulse," Flynn said quietly as they continued to move in perfect rhythm to the music. "I did the same after Catherine and Emily died. Couldn't stay in our home, surrounded by reminders." "Emily was your daughter?" Rosalie asked gently. Flynn nodded. "For years old. The brightest little spirit you could imagine. Always laughing." His voice remained steady, but Rosalie could feel the tension in his frame as he spoke of his child. "I'm sure she was wonderful," Rosalie said, unsure what else to offer in the face of such profound loss. "She was," Flynn agreed simply. Then, after a pause, "Your dress tonight, it's beautiful. Different again, but in a quieter way." The abrupt change of subject might have seemed jarring, but Rosalie understood it as a necessary shift away from painful memories. "Thank you. My mother designed it. She was a seamstress, very talented. I brought a few of her creations with me. They're all I have left of her, really." "That explains it," Flynn said with a small nod. "The distinctiveness. They're not just dresses, they're pieces of her art." The insight surprised Rosalie. "Yes, exactly. Most people just see unusual clothing, but you're right, they're expressions of who she was." The music was drawing to a close, and Flynn led her through a final turn before they came to a stop. His hand lingered at her waist for a moment before he stepped back, the proper distance reasserting itself between them. "Thank you for the dance, Rosalie," Flynn said, her name sounding new and significant in his deep voice. "Thank you, Flynn," she returned, finding that his name too felt different on her lips now, more personal. For a moment, it seemed he might say something else, but then someone called his name from across the room. With a slight bow, Flynn excused himself and moved away, leaving Rosalie with the lingering warmth of his hand at her waist and a curious sensation of connection that she hadn't expected to find in this dusty frontier town. The social gathering continued well into the evening, with more music, dancing, and conversation. Rosalie danced with several other men, Mr. Wallace from the general store, Dr. Green, and even young John Miller, who blushed furiously the entire time, but Flynn did not approach her again. She saw him speaking with various townspeople, always with that slight reserve, always slightly apart even in the midst of the community. As the evening wound down and families began to head home, Rosalie found herself helping to clean up, folding tablecloths and gathering empty plates alongside several other women. "The marshals seem to enjoy your company," Mrs. Patterson remarked casually as they worked side by side. Rosalie felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "We had a pleasant conversation." Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look. "Flynn Holloway hasn't danced with anyone since he came to Silverbridge. Not once in 5 years." Rosalie didn't know how to respond to this information. Perhaps he was just being polite to the newcomer. Perhaps, Mrs. Patterson allowed, though her tone suggested she believed otherwise. Either way, it's good to see him participating more. That man carries too much alone. Rosalie thought about this as she walked back to the boarding house later, accompanied by Mrs. Patterson and 2 other female boarders. Flynn Holloway did indeed seem to carry his burdens alone, by choice or by circumstance. Their brief dance had revealed more of the man behind the marshal's calm exterior, a man who had loved deeply, lost terribly, and somehow found the strength to continue, even to serve others despite his own grief. It was a quality Rosalie couldn't help but admire. And if she fell asleep that night with the memory of strong hands and blue eyes that saw more than most, well, admiration was a natural response to such character. Nothing more. The following weeks brought a steady rhythm to Rosalie's life in Silverbridge. Her days were filled with teaching, her evenings with grading papers and preparing lessons, occasionally interspersed with social calls or community events. The initial strangeness of her position as a newcomer faded as the town gradually accepted her as their schoolteacher. Her interactions with Flynn remained courteous but limited. She would see him on his rounds, exchanging brief greetings when their paths crossed. Once, he stopped by the schoolhouse after hours to fix a broken window latch that Rosalie had reported to Mr. Jenkins. Their conversation had been polite but impersonal, focused entirely on the repair. It was clear to Rosalie that whatever moment of connection they had shared during the church social, Flynn had deliberately stepped back from it. Perhaps he regretted revealing so much about his past, or perhaps he simply had no interest in pursuing any kind of relationship beyond the professional courtesy required in their small community. Rosalie told herself this was for the best. She had come to Silverbridge to build a new life focused on her teaching, not to become entangled in a complicated relationship with a man still haunted by his past losses. And yet, she couldn't deny a sense of disappointment at the distance Flynn maintained. Then came the storm. October had arrived with increasingly cool temperatures, but the day had begun clear and mild. Rosalie had just dismissed her students for lunch recess when she noticed dark clouds building rapidly on the western horizon. By early afternoon, the sky had turned an ominous greenish-black, and the wind had picked up considerably. "Children, we're going to end our day early," Rosalie announced, trying to keep her voice calm despite her growing concern. "I want you to go straight home, as quickly as possible. Stay together if you live in the same direction." The students, sensing her worry, gathered their things without the usual chatter and delays. Rosalie helped the youngest ones with their coats and hats, urging them to hurry. Just as the last child was leaving, the door burst open again, and Flynn stood there, his duster whipping around his legs in the wind. "Get the children to the town hall," he said without preamble. "This isn't just a thunderstorm. There's a tornado warning." Rosalie's heart raced, but she nodded, immediately turning to call the children back. "Change of plans, everyone. We're going to the town hall together. Form a line, hold hands with your partner, and stay close." Flynn helped her organize the suddenly frightened children into pairs, with the oldest students taking responsibility for the youngest. Outside, the wind had become fierce, driving dust and small debris through the air. The sky was almost black now, though it was only mid-afternoon. "Stay close," Flynn instructed, taking the lead while Rosalie brought up the rear, making sure no child strayed or fell behind. They had made it about halfway to the town hall when Rosalie heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a distant roaring, like a freight train approaching. Flynn heard it too, his head snapping up to scan the horizon. "Move faster," he called back to them. "It's coming this way." The children broke into a run, still trying to maintain their pairs, but increasingly panicked. Rosalie hurried alongside them, encouraging the slower ones, her heart pounding with fear. They were still a block from the town hall when Flynn suddenly changed direction. "This way," he shouted over the wind. "We won't make it in time." The bank is closer and built of stone. Rosalie trusted his judgment implicitly. Follow the marshal. She called to the children, herding them after Flynn's tall figure. The bank's heavy doors were already open, with the bank manager, Mr. Perkins, waving people inside. Other townspeople were running for shelter too, some toward the town hall, others into the nearest solid buildings. Flynn ushered the children inside, counting them as they passed. Rosalie was the last to enter, and as she did, Flynn seized her arm. 22, he said urgently. You said 23 were at school today. Rosalie's stomach dropped as she mentally took roll. Abigail Harper, she realized with horror. She's not here. She must have. Which direction does she live? Flynn demanded. Out past the livery, the small yellow house, Rosalie said. But Flynn, you can't get these children to the basement, Flynn directed, already turning back toward the door. Perkins knows where it is. Flynn, Rosalie called after him, but he was already gone, running into the increasingly violent wind. Mr. Perkins guided everyone down a narrow staircase to the bank's basement, a rare feature in Silverbridge, where most buildings had no below-ground level due to the rocky soil. The space was crowded with bank employees and customers who had already sought shelter there. Rosalie organized her students in a corner, trying to keep them calm, while her own thoughts raced with worry for both little Abigail and Flynn. Above them, they could hear the storm's fury intensifying, the howl of wind, the crash of objects striking the building, the ominous creaking of the structure itself. Will the marshal find Abigail? One of the younger children asked, his voice trembling. If anyone can, it's Marshal Holloway, Rosalie assured him, praying she was right. The minutes stretched endlessly. Some of the children cried quietly, others sat in shocked silence. Rosalie moved among them, offering comfort where she could, all while straining to hear any sign that the storm was passing. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the sounds above began to diminish. The howling wind faded to a more normal gale, and the impacts against the building ceased. Mr. Perkins cautiously ascended the stairs to check conditions. He returned moments later. The worst has passed, he announced. The tornado touched down at the edge of town, but didn't come through the center. There's damage, but it could have been much worse. Parents began arriving at the bank, having made their way from other shelters to find their children. Tearful reunions took place all around Rosalie as she continued to watch the door, waiting for any sign of Flynn and Abigail. When most of the children had been claimed, Rosalie could wait no longer. I'm going to look for them, she told Mrs. Patterson, who had arrived to check on her boarders. Be careful, the older woman cautioned. There could still be dangers: downed trees, damaged buildings. Rosalie nodded and hurried up the stairs. Outside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The storm had indeed spared the center of town its worst, but there was still considerable damage: broken windows, scattered debris, a few buildings with partial roof damage. People were emerging from shelters, assessing the damage, calling to neighbors. Rosalie set off in the direction of the Harper home, her skirts hiked up to allow her to move quickly through the debris-strewn streets. She had gone only a block when she saw them: Flynn walking slowly toward town, carrying something in his arms. As he drew closer, Rosalie could see it was Abigail, her small body limp against his chest. Her heart stopped for an agonizing moment until Abigail's head moved, turning to say something to Flynn. The child was alive, apparently unhurt. Rosalie ran to meet them. Abigail, thank God you're safe. The little girl looked up with tear-stained cheeks. Miss Bennett, the marshal found me. I was so scared. She was hiding under her bed, Flynn explained, his face grim. The roof's partially gone, but the bedroom was intact. Her parents? Rosalie asked quietly. Father was at the livery, he's safe. Mother was out at the Wilsons' farm for the day. Flynn shifted Abigail in his arms. I need to get her to the town hall. That's where they're gathering everyone. I'll come with you, Rosalie said immediately. As they walked, Rosalie noticed that Flynn was moving stiffly, favoring his left side. Are you hurt? It's nothing, he dismissed. Some debris caught me on the way back. I'll have Doc Green look at it later. At the town hall, they found organized activity underway. Dr. Green had set up a temporary treatment area for minor injuries, while others were organizing relief efforts for those whose homes had been damaged. Abigail's father was there, frantically asking about his daughter. The reunion between father and child brought tears to Rosalie's eyes. "You need to let the doctor examine you," Rosalie insisted to Flynn once Abigail was safely with her father. Flynn looked as if he might argue, but then winced as he shifted his weight. "Fine, but there are others who need attention more." "You're bleeding," Rosalie pointed out, noticing for the first time the dark stain spreading on his left side. "That's not nothing." Dr. Green, seeing Flynn's condition, immediately directed him to a chair. "Let me see, Marshal." Reluctantly, Flynn unbuttoned his shirt enough for the doctor to examine the wound. Rosalie caught a glimpse of a deep gash along his ribs before she politely averted her eyes. "Going to need stitches," Dr. Green pronounced. "And you've probably got some bruised ribs to go with it." "What hit you?" "Piece of a fence post, I think," Flynn said through gritted teeth as the doctor probed the wound. "Caught me when I was carrying the girl back." "You're lucky it didn't break your ribs, or worse," the doctor said seriously. "I'll stitch you up here, but then you're going home to rest." No arguments. To Rosalie's surprise, Flynn didn't protest. He must have been in more pain than he was letting on. While Dr. Green prepared his supplies, Rosalie brought Flynn a cup of water. "Thank you for what you did," she said quietly. "Going after Abigail was incredibly brave." Flynn looked up at her, his blue eyes intense despite his pain. "It's my job to protect this town. That includes its schoolchildren." "It's above and beyond your job to run into a tornado," Rosalie countered. "You could have been killed." Something flickered in Flynn's expression, a momentary vulnerability that he quickly masked. "Some risks are worth taking." Before Rosalie could respond, Dr. Green returned to begin treating the wound. She stepped away to give them privacy, turning her attention to helping organize food and blankets for those who would need temporary shelter. It was late evening by the time things had settled enough for Rosalie to return to the boarding house, which had fortunately sustained only minor damage. Mrs. Patterson greeted her with a warm hug. "Thank the Lord you're safe," the older woman said. "I've been worried sick." "I'm fine," Rosalie assured her. "Just tired." "How is everyone else?" "All accounted for and mostly unharmed," Mrs. Patterson reported. The Harper's house was the worst hit in town, along with the old Miller barn. A few other places have roof damage or broken windows. "We were lucky." "And Marshal Holloway?" Rosalie couldn't help asking. "Did he make it home all right?" Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look. "Frank Wilcox took him home after the doctor finished with him. Said he'd check on him in the morning." She hesitated, then added, "You know, dear, it might do the marshal some good to have another visitor, just to make sure he's following doctor's orders." Rosalie felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure Deputy Wilcox has that well in hand." "I'm sure," Mrs. Patterson agreed, though her expression suggested she thought otherwise. "Still, a home-cooked meal might be welcome. I happen to have made extra stew, if you'd like to take some over tomorrow." Rosalie opened her mouth to refuse, then reconsidered. Flynn had risked his life to save one of her students. The least she could do was check on his recovery. "That's very thoughtful," she said finally. "Perhaps I will." The next morning dawned clear and cool, as if the previous day's violence had never happened. But the evidence was visible throughout town as Rosalie walked to school: broken tree limbs, scattered roof shingles, a storefront with its windows boarded up. School was canceled for the day to allow for cleanup, but Rosalie went to check on the building anyway. She found it largely untouched, with only a few broken windows and some water damage from rain that had blown in during the storm. After helping with cleanup efforts at the school and around town for most of the day, Rosalie returned to the boarding house in the late afternoon. Mrs. Patterson had a container of stew ready, along with a small loaf of fresh bread. "Marshal Holloway lives in the small house behind the jail," she instructed. "The blue one with the porch." "And Rosalie, dear? Don't let him convince you he's fine if he isn't. That man would say he was fine if he was half dead." Rosalie promised to be appropriately skeptical of Flynn's self-assessment and set off with the food. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the still debris-strewn streets. Flynn's house was exactly as Mrs. Patterson had described, a modest blue structure that stood a short distance behind the jailhouse. It looked well-maintained but spare, with only a single chair on the small porch and no decorative touches visible. Rosalie hesitated before knocking. Perhaps this was too forward. But then she remembered Flynn carrying Abigail through the storm-ravaged streets, blood seeping through his shirt, and she rapped firmly on the door. There was no immediate response. Rosalie was about to knock again when she heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal Flynn, looking pale and drawn, his left arm held stiffly against his side. "Rosalie," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Is everything all right?" "I brought you some dinner," she said, holding up the container. "Mrs. Patterson's stew. I thought you might not feel up to cooking." Flynn looked momentarily nonplussed, as if the gesture was so unexpected he didn't know how to respond. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. "That's very kind. Please, come in." The interior of Flynn's home was as sparse as the exterior suggested. The front room served as both sitting area and kitchen, with simple, functional furniture and almost no personal items visible. A closed door presumably led to a bedroom. Everything was meticulously clean and organized. "Please, sit down," Flynn invited, gesturing to one of two chairs at a small table. He moved carefully, his injury clearly causing him pain despite his attempt to hide it. Rosalie set the food on the table and took the offered seat. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly," Flynn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Mrs. Patterson warned you I'd say I was fine regardless, didn't she?" Rosalie couldn't help smiling back. She might have mentioned something to that effect. "Smart woman," Flynn acknowledged. He eased himself into the other chair with a barely suppressed wince. "The truth? It hurts. Doc says I have 3 cracked ribs along with the gash. But I've had worse." "That doesn't make it any less painful now," Rosalie pointed out. "Are you taking the medicine Dr. Green gave you?" Flynn glanced away. "It makes me foggy. I need to stay alert." "You need to heal," Rosalie countered. "Frank can handle things for a few days." "Maybe," Flynn conceded. He looked at the container of stew. "That smells good. I haven't eaten since breakfast." Rosalie stood. "Let me warm it for you. Where are your bowls?" Flynn started to rise as well. "You don't have to sit," Rosalie commanded firmly. "You're injured, and I'm perfectly capable of heating stew. Bowls." For a moment, Flynn looked as if he might argue, but then he settled back with a slight nod. "Cabinet to the right of the stove. Spoons in the drawer below." Rosalie found the dishes and set about warming the stew on Flynn's small stove. As she worked, she was acutely aware of his gaze following her movements. "You're good with the children," Flynn said after a few minutes of silence. "I saw how you kept them calm during the storm." "They were frightened, but brave," Rosalie replied, stirring the stew. "Children often have more resilience than we give them credit for." "Yes," Flynn agreed softly. "They do." Something in his tone made Rosalie turn to look at him. He was staring at the table, his expression distant and sad. Thinking of his daughter, Rosalie realized. "Emily would be 9 now," Flynn said, confirming her thought. His voice was steady but quiet. "I sometimes wonder what she would be like. If she would enjoy school. What games she would play." Rosalie's heart ached for him. "I'm sure she would have been wonderful. A child raised with such love couldn't be otherwise." Flynn looked up, meeting her eyes. "Catherine always said she had my stubbornness and her curiosity. A dangerous combination." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She was right. It was the most Flynn had ever spoken about his family, and Rosalie understood the significance of him sharing these memories with her. She remained quiet, giving him space to continue if he wished. After a moment, Flynn seemed to shake himself from his reverie. "I'm sorry. You didn't come here to listen to an old man's memories." "You're hardly old," Rosalie said, returning to the stove to check the stew. "And I don't mind listening. Sometimes it helps to speak of those we've lost. Keeps them with us in a way." "And who do you speak of, Rosalie?" Flynn asked quietly. "You mentioned losing your parents, but there seems to be more to your story." Rosalie hesitated, her back still to Flynn as she ladled the hot stew into bowls. No one in Silverbridge had asked directly about her past beyond the basic facts she'd shared. It was both unnerving and somehow freeing to be asked now. "My father was a merchant," she began, bringing the bowls to the table along with the bread. "Successful, respected. My mother was his second wife, much younger. I was their only child." She sat down across from Flynn. "When father died, we discovered he had been hiding financial problems. Almost everything had to be sold to pay his debts." Flynn listened intently as he began to eat, his eyes never leaving her face. "Mother and I managed," Rosalie continued. "She had her sewing skills, and I took a position as a governess. We had a small apartment, Not like our previous home, but it was enough. She paused, the familiar pain of loss washing over her. Then Mother fell ill last winter. Pneumonia. She seemed to be recovering, but then she wasn't. Flynn nodded, understanding in his eyes. And you were alone. Yes, Rosalie confirmed. There was a distant cousin who offered assistance, but there were conditions attached that I couldn't accept. Flynn's expression darkened. What kind of conditions? Rosalie looked down at her untouched stew. Marriage. To him. He was nearly 30 years my senior and had been married twice before. Both wives died under somewhat questionable circumstances. I see, Flynn said, his voice tight with controlled anger on her behalf. When I refused, he made it difficult for me to find employment in Boston. His influence was considerable. Rosalie looked up again. So when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Silverbridge, it seemed like Providence. A fresh start, far from Boston and Cousin Harold's reach. You're brave, Flynn said simply. To leave everything familiar and come all this way alone. Not as brave as running into a tornado, Rosalie replied with a slight smile. Flynn shook his head. That's not bravery. That's just doing what needs to be done. Isn't that what courage is, really? Rosalie asked. Doing what needs to be done, even when it's difficult or frightening. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of a shared understanding that went beyond words. The moment was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Deputy Frank Wilcox stuck his head in without knocking. Flynn, thought I'd check. He stopped abruptly when he saw Rosalie. Oh, Miss Bennett. I didn't realize you were here. Miss Bennett brought dinner from Mrs. Patterson. Flynn explained, his tone neutral. What did you need, Frank? The deputy glanced between them, clearly curious but professional enough not to comment. Just checking how you're doing. And to let you know the Harper place is secured for now. We've got a crew set to start rebuilding tomorrow. Good, Flynn nodded. Thanks for handling that. No problem, Frank replied. Well, I'll leave you to your dinner. Evening, Miss Bennett. Good evening, Deputy, Rosalie responded politely. After Frank left, closing the door behind him, an awkward silence fell. Rosalie was suddenly very aware that she was alone in a man's home, sharing a meal with him, a situation that would raise eyebrows even in a frontier town like Silverbridge. I should go, she said, rising from her chair. You need to rest, and I've taken enough of your time. Flynn stood as well, moving more stiffly than before. Thank you for the meal. And for the company. It's been pleasant. The simple admission seemed to cost him something, as if acknowledging enjoyment of her company was a concession he hadn't intended to make. Rosalie gathered the empty bowls. I'll just wash these quickly before I go. You don't need to do that, Flynn protested. It will only take a moment, Rosalie insisted, already moving to the small wash basin. True to her word, she made quick work of cleaning the dishes and setting them to dry. When she turned back, Flynn was standing closer than she'd expected, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're different from anyone I've met in a long time, Rosalie Bennett, he said quietly. Before she could respond, he reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to step away if she chose. When she didn't move, his hand gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. I should have stayed away, he murmured, almost to himself. It would be simpler. Simpler isn't always better, Rosalie replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a heartbeat, it seemed Flynn might close the distance between them. But then he stepped back, letting his hand fall to his side. Thank you again for the meal, he said, his voice controlled once more. And for checking on me. Rosalie understood the withdrawal for what it was, not rejection, but caution. Flynn Holloway was a man who had loved and lost deeply. Opening himself to the possibility of attachment again would not come easily to him. You're welcome, she said simply. Please take care of yourself, Flynn. Silverbridge needs its marshal healthy. As she walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Rosalie found herself both disappointed and relieved by the encounter's conclusion. Something was growing between them, something neither had anticipated or sought. But whether it would flourish or wither remained to be seen. The weeks following the tornado were busy ones for Silverbridge. The community rallied together to repair damaged buildings and clear debris. School resumed after 2 days, with the children full of stories about the storm and its aftermath. Abigail Harper became something of a celebrity among her peers, with her tale of being rescued by the marshal growing more dramatic with each retelling. Flynn returned to light duty after a week, though Rosalie noticed he still moved carefully, protecting his injured side. They encountered each other frequently around town, exchanging polite greetings that revealed nothing of their dinner conversation or the moment that had almost become something more. As October gave way to November, preparations began for Thanksgiving. Silverbridge took its holidays seriously, and plans for a community celebration at the town hall were well underway. Rosalie found herself on the decorating committee alongside Mrs. Patterson and several other women. "We'll need evergreen boughs," Mrs. Green was saying as they discussed arrangements, "and dried corn husks for the harvest display. The children could make paper decorations," Rosalie suggested. "They've been learning about harvest traditions in different cultures." "What a lovely idea," Mrs. Patterson approved. "Perhaps they could perform a short program as well." The planning continued, with responsibilities assigned and tasks listed. Rosalie enjoyed being included, feeling that she had truly become part of the community in the 2 months since her arrival. As the meeting concluded and the women began to disperse, Mrs. Patterson pulled Rosalie aside. "Marshal Holloway will be attending the celebration," she said without preamble. "I would expect so," Rosalie replied, trying to sound indifferent. "Most of the town will be there." Mrs. Patterson gave her a knowing look. "He doesn't usually come to these functions." Frank mentioned that Flynn specifically asked when it would be held, to ensure he could attend. Rosalie wasn't sure how to respond. Was Mrs. Patterson suggesting that Flynn was planning to attend because of her? That seemed presumptuous. "I'm sure the marshal has his reasons," she said diplomatically. "Indeed he does," Mrs. Patterson agreed with a small smile. "I just thought you might like to know." Despite her attempt at nonchalance, Rosalie found herself thinking about Mrs. Patterson's words as she walked back to the schoolhouse. Could Flynn's interest in the Thanksgiving celebration have something to do with her? They had barely spoken since the night she brought him dinner, yet she often caught him watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a familiar figure standing on the schoolhouse porch. Flynn himself, looking more relaxed than she had seen him in weeks. "Good afternoon, Marshal," she greeted him, suddenly self-conscious. "Rosalie," he responded with a nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all. The children have gone home for the day." She unlocked the schoolhouse door. "Would you like to come in?" Flynn followed her inside, removing his hat as he entered. "I wanted to speak with you about something." Rosalie's heart quickened, though she kept her expression composed. "Of course. What can I help you with?" Flynn seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "The Thanksgiving celebration," he finally said. "I understand you're helping to organize it." "Yes, I'm on the decorating committee," Rosalie confirmed, puzzled by his interest. "I was wondering." Flynn paused, then straightened his shoulders as if facing a difficult task. "Would you consider attending with me? As my guest?" The invitation was so unexpected that Rosalie momentarily lost her composure. "With you?" she repeated. Flynn's expression shuddered slightly at her response. "If you'd rather not, I completely understand. It was just a thought." "No," Rosalie said quickly. "I mean, yes, I would like to attend with you." "You just surprised me." The tension in Flynn's posture eased somewhat. "I've been thinking about what you said, about doing what needs to be done, even when it's difficult. And asking me to the Thanksgiving celebration was difficult?" Rosalie asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "Terrifying," Flynn admitted, the corner of his mouth lifting in an answering smile. "I haven't. This isn't something I've done in a very long time." The admission touched Rosalie deeply. For a man like Flynn, acknowledging vulnerability did not come easily. That he was willing to do so with her felt significant. "I would be honored to attend with you," she said softly. Flynn nodded, seeming almost relieved. "Thank you. I'll call for you at the boarding house, if that's acceptable." "It is," Rosalie confirmed. They stood looking at each other for a moment, both seemingly uncertain what to say next. Finally, Flynn settled his hat back on his head. "I should let you get back to your work," he said. "Thank you for agreeing to accompany me." After he had gone, Rosalie sat at her desk, her planned work forgotten as she contemplated what had just occurred. Flynn Holloway had asked to escort her to the Thanksgiving celebration, publicly acknowledging an interest in her that went beyond casual acquaintance. It was a small step, perhaps, but for a man who had kept himself apart from such connections for 5 years, it represented something profound. And for Rosalie, who had come to Silverbridge seeking a new beginning but not expecting to find a personal connection of this nature, it was equally significant. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of early snow that transformed Silverbridge into a scene from a holiday card. Rosalie spent the morning at the town hall, helping with final decorations before returning to the boarding house to prepare for the evening. She chose her dress with particular care, a warm russet color that her mother had created for autumn occasions, with subtle gold embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It was festive without being ostentatious, and the color brought out the warm highlights in her brown hair. Mrs. Patterson approved with a nod when Rosalie came downstairs. "You look lovely, dear. The marshal won't know what hit him." "Mrs. Patterson," Rosalie protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "Oh, don't mind me," the older woman said with a wave of her hand. "I'm just pleased to see two people I care about finding some happiness. You both deserve it." Before Rosalie could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Patterson went to answer it, returning a moment later with Flynn. He was dressed in his best clothing, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. But what struck Rosalie most was his expression when he saw her, a look of genuine appreciation that made her heart flutter. "You look beautiful," Flynn said simply. "Thank you," Rosalie replied, suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." Flynn offered his arm. "Shall we?" The walk to the town hall was magical. The early evening sky was clear and star-filled, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Flynn's solid presence beside her provided both warmth and a curious sense of rightness that Rosalie hadn't expected. "How are your ribs?" she asked, realizing she hadn't inquired about his injury recently. "Much better," Flynn assured her. "Doc Green says I'm healing well. Another week or two, and I'll be good as new." "I'm glad," Rosalie said sincerely. "Though I hope you won't be testing your recovery by charging into any more natural disasters." Flynn chuckled, the sound warming Rosalie more than her woolen shawl. "I'll try to avoid it." The town hall was transformed when they arrived. Evergreen boughs and dried autumn flowers adorned every surface. Tables were arranged around the perimeter, laden with food brought by the townspeople. A space had been cleared in the center for the children's performance, and afterward, there would be music and dancing. Their entrance together did not go unnoticed. Rosalie was aware of curious glances and whispered conversations, but Flynn seemed unconcerned, guiding her through the room with a hand lightly at her back. "Marshal, Miss Bennett," Mayor Wilson greeted them. "So glad you could join us. Quite a display the children have prepared, I hear." "They've worked very hard," Rosalie confirmed. "I think everyone will enjoy it." The evening progressed pleasantly. The children's performance, a series of recitations and songs about harvest traditions, was received with enthusiastic applause. The communal meal that followed was abundant and delicious, with everyone contributing their specialties. Throughout it all, Flynn remained attentive but not possessive, introducing Rosalie to people she hadn't yet met, bringing her a plate when the food was served, ensuring her glass was never empty. It was, Rosalie realized, the first time she had seen him truly relaxed in a social setting. After the meal, the musicians set up their instruments, and dancing began. Flynn turned to Rosalie. "Would you care to dance?" "I would love to," she replied, taking his offered hand. As they moved together to the music, Rosalie was again struck by Flynn's natural grace. He led confidently but gently, his hand warm at her waist, maintaining a proper distance while still creating a sense of intimacy between them. "Everyone is watching us," Rosalie observed quietly. "Let them," Flynn replied. "They've had little enough to gossip about lately." Rosalie laughed. "Are we providing entertainment, then? In a small town like this?" "Absolutely." Flynn's expression turned more serious. "Does it bother you?" Rosalie considered the question. "No," she decided. "Though I hope they find something else to talk about soon." "They will," Flynn assured her. Small-town attention spans are mercifully short when it comes to other people's business. As the evening continued, Rosalie found herself increasingly comfortable with Flynn and with their public association. They danced several times, talked with various townspeople, and enjoyed the celebration together in a way that felt natural and unforced. When it was time to leave, Flynn walked her back to the boarding house through the quiet, star-lit streets. They moved slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," Flynn said as they reached the boarding house steps. "I enjoyed myself more than I have in a very long time." "So did I," Rosalie replied honestly. "Thank you for asking me." They stood facing each other in the pool of light from the porch lamp. Flynn's expression was intent, his blue eyes searching hers as if looking for an answer to an unasked question. "Rosalie," he began, then hesitated. "I'm not good at this. At expressing certain things." "You don't have to be," Rosalie said softly. Flynn took a step closer. "I want to see you again. Not just in passing around town, but like tonight. Would that be agreeable to you?" The formal phrasing made Rosalie smile. "Yes, Flynn. That would be very agreeable to me." Relief and something warmer flickered in Flynn's eyes. He reached out slowly, his hand coming to rest lightly on her shoulder. "May I?" he asked, his voice low. Rosalie nodded, her heart suddenly racing. Flynn leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, the lightest of kisses, gentle and questioning. Rosalie responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beating as rapidly as her own. The kiss deepened slightly, still gentle but more certain. Then Flynn drew back, though his hand remained on her shoulder. "Good night, Rosalie," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Good night, Flynn," she replied, knowing her cheeks were flushed but not caring. As she watched him walk away, Rosalie felt a sense of possibility that she hadn't experienced since coming to Silverbridge, a feeling that her new beginning might include not just professional fulfillment, but personal happiness as well. The weeks following Thanksgiving brought a change to Silverbridge, not just in the weather, which turned decidedly wintry, but in the relationship between the town's schoolteacher and its marshal. They were seen together regularly, walking after church on Sundays, sharing occasional meals at the hotel restaurant, attending the small Christmas pageant put on by Rosalie's students. Nothing improper occurred. Flynn was scrupulously respectful of Rosalie's reputation, always ensuring their meetings were public and above reproach. But there was no mistaking the growing attachment between them, evident in the way Flynn's serious expression softened when Rosalie entered a room, or the way Rosalie's eyes sought him out in a crowd. The town observed this development with mostly approving interest. Flynn Holloway had served Silverbridge well for 5 years, earning respect for his fairness and dedication. That he might find happiness with their new schoolteacher seemed fitting to most. There were a few who whispered that perhaps it was too soon after his loss, or that the schoolteacher was too refined for frontier life, but these voices were the minority. For Rosalie, the approach of Christmas brought both joy and a touch of melancholy. It would be her first Christmas without her mother, a fact that weighed on her despite her happiness in Silverbridge. She threw herself into preparations at the school, helping the children create decorations and rehearse carols for their parents. Flynn noticed her occasional moments of sadness, though she tried to hide them. A week before Christmas, he suggested a Saturday afternoon sleigh ride. "The Jenkins family has offered to lend us their sleigh," he explained. "I thought you might enjoy seeing some of the countryside around Silverbridge." "That sounds wonderful," Rosalie agreed, touched by his thoughtfulness. The day was perfect for a sleigh ride, cold but not bitter, with a bright blue sky and snow-covered landscape that sparkled in the sunlight. Flynn arrived at the boarding house with the sleigh, a handsome conveyance with runners that glided smoothly over the packed snow and a pair of sturdy horses to pull it. He had brought warm blankets to wrap around them, and Mrs. Patterson provided a thermos of hot chocolate to keep the chill away, she said with a wink that made Rosalie blush. Once they were settled in the sleigh, blankets tucked around them, Flynn guided the horses out of town and into the surrounding countryside. The landscape opened up before them, rolling hills blanketed in pristine snow, stands of pine trees with branches heavy with white, occasional farmhouses sending plumes of smoke into the clear air. "It's beautiful," Rosalie breathed, taking in the scenery. "So different from Boston. Different from Tennessee, too," Flynn remarked. "That's where Catherine and I were from originally." Rosalie glanced at him, surprised. Flynn rarely spoke of his past voluntarily. "I didn't know you were from Tennessee." Flynn nodded, his eyes on the horses. "Small town outside of Nashville. My father had a farm there. Catherine's family owned the general store." "How did you become a lawman?" Rosalie asked, genuinely curious. "Served as a deputy under a good sheriff back home," Flynn explained. After. After we lost Emily and Catherine, I couldn't stay. Too many memories. I drifted for a while, took temporary positions in different towns. Then Silverbridge needed a marshal, and it seemed as good a place as any to stop. And now? Rosalie asked softly. Is it still just a place to stop? Flynn was quiet for a moment. The only sound the jingling of the harness and the soft thud of the horse's hooves in the snow. Then he turned to look at her directly. Not anymore, he said simply. The admission hung between them, significant in its simplicity. Rosalie reached out and placed her gloved hand over his on the reins. Flynn turned his hand to clasp hers, and they continued their journey in comfortable silence. After a time, Flynn guided the sleigh to a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. I thought we might stop here for a while, he suggested. The view of the valley is particularly good from this spot. They secured the horses and walked to the edge of the clearing, where the land fell away to reveal a panoramic vista of the valley below, with Silverbridge visible in the distance, smoke rising from its chimneys. It's breathtaking, Rosalie said, taking in the scene. I come here sometimes when I need to think, Flynn admitted. It helps to see things from a distance occasionally. And what do you think about? Rosalie asked, turning to face him. Flynn's expression was serious as he looked down at her. Lately? Mostly you. The directness of his answer caught Rosalie off guard. Me? You, Flynn confirmed. How unexpected you were. How you arrived in that purple dress that made everyone stare and somehow became essential to this town. To me. Rosalie's heart raced at his words. Flynn, I didn't want this, he continued, his voice low and intense. Didn't want to care for anyone again. It's frightening. I know, Rosalie whispered, understanding completely. After losing her parents, the idea of forming new attachments had seemed terrifying, the potential for more loss too great. But here we are, Flynn said, his blue eyes searching hers. And I find I can't regret it, even with the fear. Neither can I, Rosalie admitted. Flynn reached out, his gloved hands framing her face with gentle care. I love you, Rosalie Bennett. I didn't expect to, didn't plan to, but I do. The declaration, spoken in that quiet clearing with the winter landscape spread out below them, was all the more powerful for its simplicity. Rosalie felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy so intense it was almost painful. I love you too, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. I came to Silverbridge looking for a new beginning, not knowing that you would be the most important part of it. Flynn's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, rare and warming. He leaned down and kissed her, his lips cold at first but quickly warming against hers. Rosalie's arms slipped around his waist as she returned the kiss, feeling as though something long unsettled within her had finally found its proper place. When they drew apart, Flynn kept his arms around her, holding her close against the cold. I have something for you, he said. An early Christmas gift. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It's not much, he warned as he handed it to her. Rosalie untied the string carefully and folded back the paper to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver pendant in the shape of a book, suspended on a delicate chain. Flynn, it's beautiful, she breathed, lifting the pendant to examine it more closely. Open it, Flynn instructed softly. Rosalie discovered that the book opened on tiny hinges. Inside was a miniature image that she recognized, a pressed wildflower, perfectly preserved. It's an Indian paintbrush, Flynn explained. They bloom in the hills around here in spring. The color reminded me of your dress, the one you were wearing when we first met. I thought you might like a reminder of that day. The thoughtfulness of the gift moved Rosalie deeply. That Flynn had not only remembered the dress that had drawn such attention, but had found a way to commemorate their first meeting in such a personal way spoke volumes about his feelings. I love it, she said, looking up at him with shining eyes. Will you help me put it on? Flynn took the necklace and carefully fastened it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin despite the cold air. The pendant rested just below her throat, a tangible symbol of their beginning. Thank you, Rosalie said, touching the pendant gently. I'll treasure it always. They stayed in the clearing a while longer, talking quietly about their pasts and, increasingly, their future. When they finally returned to the sleigh, the short winter day was beginning to fade, the sky taking on the deep blue of approaching twilight. As they drove back towards Silverbridge, Rosalie nestled close to Flynn beneath the blankets, her head resting against his shoulder. The quiet contentment she felt was unlike anything she had experienced before, a sense of rightness and belonging that went beyond mere happiness. They had both come to Silverbridge seeking refuge from loss, neither expecting to find love. Yet here they were, traveling together through the winter landscape, their separate journeys now irrevocably intertwined. Christmas in Silverbridge was a community affair, with the entire town gathering at the church for a service followed by a celebration at the town hall. Rosalie wore her mother's green silk dress, the most formal of the garments she had brought from Boston, with Flynn's pendant nestled at her throat. Flynn escorted her proudly, no longer making any attempt to hide his feelings for her. They sat together during the service, sang carols side by side, and accepted the good wishes of townspeople with grateful smiles. "You two make a handsome couple, Mrs. Miller told them during the celebration afterward, little Sarah balanced on her hip. "It does my heart good to see it." Similar sentiments were expressed throughout the evening, with even the initially skeptical Mr. Jenkins grudgingly admitting that the marshal and the schoolteacher suited each other well enough. As the new year approached, Flynn began to speak more concretely about their future. They were walking together on a Sunday afternoon, the winter sun low in the sky, when he broached the subject directly. "I've been thinking about the house," he said, his tone casual, though Rosalie sensed the importance behind his words. "It's small, but with some work, it could be more comfortable. Perhaps an addition at the back for another bedroom." Rosalie's heart quickened at the implication. "Are you planning renovations?" Flynn stopped walking and turned to face her. "I'm planning a proposal, Rosalie." Not very subtly, it seems. A smile bloomed on Rosalie's face. "I've never required subtlety." Flynn took both her hands in his. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. I know it's only been a few months, and if you need more time, I understand. But I wanted you to know my intentions." "Flynn Holloway," Rosalie said, squeezing his hands. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm trying to," Flynn admitted with a rueful smile. "Not very successfully, it appears." Rosalie laughed, the sound bright in the cold air. "Then let me help you. Yes, I will marry you. I don't need more time to know that I love you and want to share my life with you." The joy that transformed Flynn's face was something Rosalie knew she would remember all her days, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the full smile that was so rare and precious, the sense of barriers finally and completely falling away. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For your purple dress, for your courage, for loving me despite everything." "Thank you for smiling that day," Rosalie replied, her voice muffled against his chest. "For seeing something worth smiling at when everyone else was laughing." They were married in the spring, when the Indian paintbrush bloomed red-orange on the hillsides around Silverbridge. Rosalie wore a dress of her own design, inspired by her mother's style, but uniquely hers, ivory silk with subtle purple embroidery at the hem and sleeves. The entire town turned out for the ceremony at the small church, followed by a celebration that spilled into the streets. Children scattered flower petals, musicians played well into the evening, and even the most reserved citizens joined in the dancing and feasting. As dusk fell, Flynn led his bride away from the celebration toward their home, his small blue house, now expanded and renovated with a new bedroom, a larger kitchen, and a proper parlor. Most importantly, it had a wide front porch with 2 rocking chairs side by side, facing west to catch the sunset. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holloway," Flynn said as they climbed the porch steps. "It's perfect," Rosalie replied, looking at the house that would be their home, the place where they would build their life together. Flynn's arms encircled her waist from behind, and he rested his chin on her shoulder. "No, not perfect," he corrected gently, "but ours. And that's better than perfect." Rosalie turned in his embrace to face him. "You're right. Perfect isn't what we need. We just need each other, with all our imperfections and scars and hopes." Flynn's kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would share, a life neither had expected to find when they each came to Silverbridge seeking only escape from their pasts. As twilight deepened into night, They sat together on their porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast western sky. Flynn's arm was around Rosalie's shoulders, her head resting against him, their hearts beating in comfortable unison. "I've been thinking," Flynn said after a comfortable silence. "Maybe next year we could add a small room off the new bedroom. For a nursery." Rosalie smiled in the darkness. "I'd like that very much." They remained on the porch until the night grew cool, talking quietly about their hopes for the future children, perhaps, and many years of watching Silverbridge grow and change around them. The town had given them both a second chance, a new beginning neither had anticipated. And it had all started with a purple dress, a weary smile, and the courage to reach beyond loss towards something new and unexpected. As they finally went inside, hand in hand, Rosalie thought that perhaps that was the most important lesson she had learned, that life's most precious gifts often come disguised as challenges, wrapped in unfamiliar packages that invite laughter from those who cannot see their true value. Flynn had seen, and in seeing, he had smiled. And in that smile, they had both found their way home. In the years that followed, Silverbridge continued to grow and prosper. The railroad finally reached the town in 1880, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Flynn remained marshal, his reputation for fairness and integrity growing throughout the territory. Rosalie continued teaching until the birth of their first child in 1881, a daughter they named Catherine Emily, who inherited her father's blue eyes and her mother's spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Thomas James, who grew to be the image of his father in both appearance and temperament. As the children grew, so did the Holloway home, with additions and improvements that transformed the once bachelor quarters into a true family dwelling, always with the porch and its rocking chairs facing the sunset. Rosalie eventually returned to teaching part-time, and also began designing clothing for the women of Silverbridge and surrounding communities, incorporating her mother's unique style with practical adaptations for frontier life. Her creations became sought after, known for their distinctive touches and careful craftsmanship. Through the years, the pendant Flynn had given her never left her neck, a constant reminder of their beginning, of wildflowers and purple dresses, and the power of seeing beauty where others saw only difference. And when their daughter Catherine asked, as children do, how her parents had met and fallen in love, Rosalie would always begin the story the same way. "I was wearing a purple dress that made people laugh, but your father said it was the first thing he'd smiled at all week." Flynn would listen to this telling with a small smile, his eyes still lighting up when they fell on his wife, even after decades of marriage. And sometimes, when they were alone, he would whisper, "Still the best thing I ever smiled at," before kissing her with all the tenderness of their first embrace. In a small cemetery on a gentle slope overlooking Silverbridge, 2 headstones stand side by side, weathered by time but still legible. Flynn Holloway, beloved husband, father, and guardian of his community, lived to see his grandchildren grow and his town flourish. Rosalie Bennett Holloway, teacher, mother, and creator of beauty, rests beside him. Their journey together complete, but their legacy continuing in the lives they touched and the love they shared. And if visitors look closely at Rosalie's headstone, they might notice a small carving at its base, a wildflower in full bloom, a simple tribute to a love that began with a purple dress and a weary smile, and grew to fill a lifetime with joy.